How long are you willing to wait to never have to work for money again? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the only question that matters in this conversation, because $3,000 a month in dividends is a real number. It's not impossible. It's not luck. It's not an inheritance. It's math. It's time. It's a series of small decisions repeated with an almost painful regularity until money starts working for you more efficiently than you ever worked for it. But before you get there, you need to understand exactly what you're buying when you buy a dividend. You open your brokerage app. The screen is full of numbers, tickers, charts, percentages in green and red. It's a language you've been learning for the past few months, but it still looks like a cockpit the first time you see it. You filter by REITs, real estate investment trusts. One fund catches your eye, dividend yield of 5.8% per year. You do the math in your head. If you have $620,000 invested at 5.8% annually, you receive $35,960 per year. Divide by 12. That's $2,997 a month, not $3,000. But you're just starting. What you're buying when you buy that fund isn't exactly a piece of paper. You're buying a fraction of warehouse space in the Midwest, strip malls in the Sun Belt, office towers in Seattle. Every time a lease is renewed, every time a tenant pays rent, an infinitesimal fraction of that money belongs to you. Not to the bank, not to the government, to you. That's the concept that changes everything when you finally understand it. You're not buying a number on a screen. You're buying cash flow. Income that exists regardless of whether you wake up or sleep, travel or get sick. But the path to get there has a price, and the price isn't money. It's time. You make your first deposit. $300. It's what was left after rent, groceries, gas, the gym membership you swear you'll actually use. $300 felt like a lot before you decided to invest. Now it feels like a drop. You buy shares in 3 different funds. One warehouse, REIT, one mortgage, REIT, one retail, REIT. Diversification, you've learned, is the only free protection the market offers. At the end of the month, you received the first dividend, $1.47. You read the number 3 times. $1.47. The price of a candy bar, less than a cup of coffee. Money that appeared in your account without you having done absolutely anything beyond buying those shares 30 days ago. It's laughable. You know it's laughable, but there's something about that number you can't ignore. Something that didn't exist before. Proof that the system works. A seed that hasn't grown yet but is there under the soil, alive. You reinvest the $1.47 and make the second contribution of $300. Year 1. The invisibility of progress. 12 months have passed. You didn't miss a single contribution, not the weeks when the car needed repairs, not the month you had an unexpected medical expense. You adjusted, cut somewhere else, kept the $300 untouched. You contributed $3,600 over the year. Plus reinvested returns, your portfolio sits at $3,820. The difference between what you put in and what's there is almost imperceptible. The market moved sideways for most of the year. 2 of your funds appreciated. 1 fell 8%. You're receiving, on average, $18 a month in dividends. $18. It's not $3,000. Not even close. And this is the part where most people start questioning themselves, where the enthusiasm of month 1 meets the slow, drama-free reality of the actual process. The human brain was built to respond to immediate signals. Danger, reward, feedback. When you put in effort and don't see proportional results, the brain interprets it as failure, not as long-term investing. That's the trap. Because what happened in your first year wasn't insignificant. It was the foundation, and foundations don't show on the surface. They sit beneath everything, invisible, holding up what comes next. Year 3, when the math starts getting interesting, 3 years. You increased your contribution every month you could. In year 2, you got to $400 a month. By the start of year 3, you were at $500. A raise, a side project, an expense you cut and never missed. Your portfolio sits at $19,700, almost $20,000. Monthly dividends reached $95. $95 a month. Money that arrives every month. Every month, without you needing to do anything beyond continuing to exist as a shareholder in those funds. You started noticing something different. The dividend reinvestment already represents a contribution on its own. You no longer need to pull $95 from your paycheck to invest. That money comes from the portfolio itself. It's starting to feed itself. Not much, but enough for you to understand that something changed. Compound interest isn't linear. It's exponential, and the exponential part hasn't started yet. You're in the flat section of the curve, the base, where the angle of ascent looks like 0. But the angle isn't 0, it's just too small to see with the naked eye. Year 5, the psychological inflection point. 5 years after the first contribution, you do a quick calculation on a Saturday morning. Your portfolio sits at $48,600. Monthly dividends reached $236. $236 a month. That's more than some people's utility bills. An extra income that could already cover your phone plan, a streaming subscription, a tank of gas every month. But the most important thing isn't the number itself. It's what the number represents psychologically. You've moved from "this is a drop in the ocean" to "this is becoming real." It's not enough for you to stop working. Not yet. But it's enough for you to feel, for the first time in a tangible way, that the system is working. You remember year 1, the $18 a month. You multiplied that number by 12 and 8 months without making any extra contributions beyond what you were already making. The portfolio worked for you while you slept, while you were in meetings, while you ate that $15 lunch you swore you were going to cut. Now something happens that you didn't expect. You start recalculating. If $48,600 generates $236 a month, how much do you need to generate $3,000 a month? The answer is $620,000. $620,000. You look at the number, it feels distant. But you remember how $48,600 felt distant 5 years ago, when you had $300 in your brokerage account and $1.47 in dividends. The perspective has shifted. And then the thing happens that separates those who make it from those who give up. But first, you need to understand what the market is going to do to you along the way. Year 7. The crisis you didn't see coming. 7 years of investing. You woke up on a Monday and the market opened down. Not 2%, not 5%. Down 18% in 2 days. A crash. One of those that appears every few years with a different name but the same effect. The brokerage dashboard turns red. The news turns apocalyptic, and everyone around you starts asking whether you're going to sell. Your portfolio went from $77,400 to $63,500 in 48 hours. $13,900 evaporated on paper. You opened the app 17 times that day. Every time you opened it, the number was smaller. Your hand hovered over the sell button for a second. Just 1 second. But you didn't sell. Not because you're made of steel. Not because you didn't feel the emotional weight of that red number. You felt it. Anyone who says they don't is lying, or doesn't have enough money invested for it to matter. You didn't sell because you understood something fundamental about dividends that most people ignore. The share price fell. The dividends didn't. The warehouses kept their tenants. The leases kept running. The tenants kept paying rent. The cash flow from the funds didn't change. What changed was the market's mood, the price people were willing to pay at that specific moment of collective panic. You didn't just not sell. You bought more. With the reinvested dividends and part of your opportunity reserve, money you'd set aside specifically for moments like this, you bought shares at prices you hadn't seen in 2 years. 12 months later, your portfolio sat at $97,800. The crash was the best investment you never planned to make. Year 10. Halfway there. 10 years. You're sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday night. It's not a special night. You didn't plan this moment. You opened the app out of habit. It's not anxiety anymore. It's routine. And you saw the number. $178,400. $178,000. Monthly dividends reached $860. You sit there staring at that number for a moment you can't measure. $860 a month. Without working. Without selling anything. Without serving a customer. Without meetings. Without quotas. You thought about all the versions of yourself that existed over the past 10 years. The version who made the first $300 contribution without really believing. The version who kept going through the hard months. The version who didn't sell during the crash. The version who increased contributions when they could have increased their lifestyle instead. Each of those versions made a small decision, and each of those decisions is represented in that number. You haven't reached $3,000 a month yet. But you're halfway, and the second half will go faster than the first. Not because you'll work harder, because compound interest will run on top of a much larger base. The curve's angle is finally visible. Year 12. The question that changes everything. You received a job offer, a better position, salary 40% higher, but in another city. It would require moving, adjusting, reorganizing your entire life. 2 years ago, you would have accepted without thinking much. Now you open the spreadsheet and ran a different calculation. Your dividends are at $1,100 a month. If you don't take the job, the dividends keep coming. If you do take it, they also keep coming. That's not the point. The point is that for the first time in your adult life, a career decision wasn't made based on financial necessity. You didn't need the raise. You wanted it. And wanting is different from needing. You turned down the offer, not because the job was bad, because your life, the way it was, already had the value you needed. And you'd learn to recognize that. Something happens when money stops being an emergency. You start making better decisions, not because you got wiser, because you removed fear from the center of your choices. The fear of not paying the bills, the fear of losing the job, the fear of not being enough. Those fears take up enormous cognitive space. When they disappear, you think more clearly. You haven't reached $3,000 yet, but you've already reached something different, something without a clear name but that most people will never experience. Year 15. The different weight of time. 15 years. Your portfolio sits at $284,000. Dividends reached $1,380 a month. You're $1,620 away from the number you chose back then. $3,000. The number that seemed arbitrary when you started. Why $3,000 and not $2,000 or $5,000? But that you chose because it was the value that, at that moment, represented freedom. It would cover all your expenses with room to spare. Leave space to live, not just survive. You're almost there. Not in months, probably in less than a year, with the reinvestments. And something strange happens at this point in the journey. You're not euphoric. You expected euphoria. You expected that getting close to the number would make you feel something dramatic, an emotional turning point, an internal celebration. Instead, you feel something closer to clarity, as if you could finally see the whole path at once, the beginning, the middle, the stumbles, the crashes, the nights when the market fell, and you sat with your hand hovering over the sell button. And you see that each of those moments was necessary, not because you needed to suffer, but because you needed to learn that the journey was the real part. The number was just a coordinate. Here's a question I carry with me. Where are you in this journey? At the beginning, the middle, or close to the number you chose? Tell me in the comments where you are, because I want to know who's on the other side of this screen. I want to know who's in month 1 with $1.47 in dividends and who's in year 10 with $860 arriving every month. That conversation is more interesting than it seems. Year 20. What changes and what doesn't? 20 years of consistent investing. Your portfolio sits at $420,000. Dividends reached $2,050 a month. You passed the number 5 years ago. You passed it and kept going. Not because you're greedy, because stopping contributions when you still had the capacity to contribute would have been an emotional decision disguised as satisfaction. $2,050 a month. You received that amount every month, regardless of anything. The world can be in crisis or expansion. The government can change. Interest rates can rise or fall. You can be traveling, sleeping, or simply looking out the window. The money arrives. But here's what nobody tells you about this moment. Financial freedom doesn't solve human problems. It removes a layer of human problems and reveals the layer underneath. You'll still have friction in your relationships. You'll still have health to manage. You'll still have purpose to find, meaningless days, difficult mornings. Money doesn't cure any of those things. What it does is give you the space to deal with them without the additional pressure of financial survival. That alone is worth 20 years. Year 25. The conversation with someone starting out. Someone close to you, younger, asks for your advice. They're 24, just landed their first job. They want to start investing but don't know where to begin. They're looking at you as someone who arrived somewhere and want to know the path. You could tell the whole story. The 25 years, the milestones, the numbers, the crashes. But you tell them just one thing. You say, the process is going to feel completely pointless for most of the time. The first dividends are going to feel like a joke. The market is going to crash and everyone around you will say you should sell. There will be months when you'll want to use the money for something else. Don't. Not because the money isn't yours. It is. You can do whatever you want with it. But every time you pull from the portfolio before the time comes, you're not just spending the face value. You're spending the future compound interest on that amount. You're spending dividends that don't exist yet but would exist if you'd left the money alone. You're spending time, and time is the one thing you can't buy back. $3,000 a month in dividends isn't a dream. It's an equation. On one side, the capital required around $620,000 depending on the average yield of your portfolio. On the other, the time and consistency to accumulate that capital while reinvesting every cent the portfolio generates. The math doesn't lie. The problem was never the math. The problem was always the human part, the impatience with the invisible, the discomfort with the slow process, the temptation to consume today what could buy freedom tomorrow. Every contribution you made without receiving anything in return was a question you asked the future, and the future eventually answers. The only question that remains is this: are you willing to wait long enough to hear the answer?